Hello, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. My name is Danesh-Mand, and it's my pleasure delivering this short presentation to you today. As you are probably aware, to further support the students undertaking the subject of Advanced Project Risk Management 15317, a number of additional online training material have been developed. These short targeted presentations will help you to better identify and understand the key aspects of this topic for further studies. However, I would like to highlight that please note this material should be only used as a supplementary, not as a replacement for full training documents and reference provided for this subject. Please also refer to the university's course online platform or contact your lecturer to access and discuss a full set of training material for this subject. On that basis, let us start our session today on the subject of cost contingency determination. In other words, how much is enough and reasonable and optimum from a cost perspective. But just before that, this is the outline of a few other sessions that are available, a couple of case studies on the QRA, the general or basic risk and contingency management. We do have a scheduled contingency determination session. The session 4, which is this session, is quickly taking you through the cost contingency calculation. And we do have contingency allocation and contingency control as well. As a quick introduction about myself, I'm currently a director with KPMG Australia. My background, I'm a civil engineer. I did some design, a master in design, but I never became a designer. I mainly work with the tier 1 contractors across a wide range of roles and positions like planner, scheduler, contract admin, quantity surveys, and then probably about 20 years ago, I got very interested in the topic of risk management, and at the time, I think the initial risk management standard came through, and it got my attention. So I spent a lot of my time over the last 20 years. I decided to go back to uni, and I did my second master in application of risk management, and especially quantification of risk and risk engineering in developing and delivering major projects. And over the last 20 years, I've mainly tried to help organizations to use the risk engineering. I'm currently the New South Wales president of Risk Engineering Society, or RES, and we are one of the technical associations under Engineers Australia. So on that introduction, we do also have a group on LinkedIn, RES group, and also if you're interested, I'm definitely happy to be connected and share some of the experiences and knowledge that we do see across the industry. Before I get into the topic for today, again, as always, I would like to express that anything that we will discuss today or I will present, it's my own personal experience and opinion, and they do not reflect or represent the official policy position or any recommendation of KPMG Australia, Engineers Australia, or Risk Engineering Society. So they do have a general nature and should not be used for any decision making before or without any further assessment. Okay, so I think we are ready to get into the topic, and let's have a quick overview of the relationship between the risk and contingency, just in case you haven't looked at the other material before. So when you look at the risk, when you look at the ISO 31000, the 2018 revision, there are 3 pillars that they're quite important. One is a framework, which, as you can see, is going around the designing implementing, evaluation, improving, and integration, which is the framework, and it's mainly related to the leadership and commitment when it comes to the project risk management overall in the organization. The second pillar is related to the principles, and the principles, as you can see, this is this circle, and it's related to the creation of value and protecting the value from risk management. And the last but not the least is the process. So, I mean, from establishing the context to the risk assessment, which is including risk identification, risk analysis, risk evaluation, the treatment, and concurrently all the other ones like monitoring, reviewing, communication, consultation, reporting, and recording. So the question is, if you identify the risk, you do the risk analysis, and you decided which one you want to treat them. After you discuss about the treatment, if residual risk, which is the risk after the post-treatment, if the residual risk is not acceptable and the further treatment is not visible, in other words, it doesn't make sense to spend more money or time trying to reduce the likelihood or reduce the consequence of the risk, then the other alternatively, you may need a contingency. You may need some additional money or additional time to have in your pocket just in case the risk occurs. And that's a concept of contingency that we do have. So for the purpose of today's discussion, we want to focus on the cost contingency, and there is another session for the time that you can refer. And obviously, as I said earlier, please make sure that you refer to the full training material that is already available, and other references as well, including the RES contingency guideline, which is quite a good document as a reference, as a first reference. So when it comes to the contingency is a specific allocation of resources. It might be cost, resources, or time required in addition to the base estimate or base schedule. And it's mainly to cover the inherent and contingent risks. A couple of few items that I would like to highlight is that contingency is not or should not be a replacement for a proper cost estimation. I do see a lot of sometimes the people said, oh, don't worry about the estimate. We just put the contingency. We put more contingency on top of it. No, it shouldn't be like that. You need to try with available information that you do have. You always need to try to prepare a best and proper cost estimate, whatever level of details is available. Then the contingency should be calculated on top of it. Contingency should not be included in the base estimate, in budget or cost plan or forecast. Again, it's quite common. Sometimes when I review the cost estimates and the contingency modeling, very quickly I realize that the different team members, they're putting some allowances or they're embedding some fat, or you call it fat or contingency or allowance, whatever you want to call it. There are different team members that they're putting and including those numbers in. By the time it gets to the risk and the final step, you're putting another contingency on top of contingency, and that's not the good practice. The next one is if you do have some undesirable event that is highly likely to happen, and highly likely generally it depends. I mean, I personally, anything more than 80% likelihood, I prefer to put it as part of the base estimate. In other words, assuming that it will happen 100%, and then I don't put it in the contingency. And the recommendation is that you better actually do that. You better take it out from contingency and price it or time it. And the last but not the least is that the contingency shouldn't include the escalation. But how does it work? I mean, in terms of the process, the contingency does have three steps or three parts. Calculation, which is here. Allocation, which there are two parts. I think we do have a session for contingency allocation as well. Please refer to it. And then we do have another session for contingency control. The document, the key document that we are using in terms of the subject of contingency is the RES Contingency Guideline, the second edition, which if a complementary copy of this document is available, please discuss with your lecturer or send me an email. And if you cannot find it, then I'm happy to share it with you. This is the document that and probably the next slide, actually, we should have it there. Yep, so that's the cover page for the guideline, a document that the RES started to develop in 2013. Initially, we thought, oh, it should only take 6 months because that's obvious. We know exactly what we want to do and so on. You might be interested to know that the first edition took us 3 years. So we released it in 2016, the first edition, and the second edition is was available or was published or released in last year, 2019. It's a document that does have a key element of the contingency from the process. And as I said, within the process, it does have the determination or calculation, allocation and control. It does have the development and delivery, does the section for project lifecycle, as well as the contingency at different levels of project program portfolio. Also project performance, how does it work if you're using the earned value, how does it work with the contingency, and the last but not the least, there is a good portion of the document that is referring to government requirements. So let's get into the subject of today specifically, and that's the cost contingency determination. So when it comes to the determination, based on, again, by referencing to the RES guideline, there's quite a wide range of methods and techniques and tools available. So as you can see, generally when you look at from the top, at the very top level, the methods are usually grouped into deterministic methods or probabilistic methods. And the difference is the deterministic methods usually referring to some sort of scenario, which probabilistic methods, they do have consider a wider range of different scenarios. And the best of, not the best one, but the one that generally is recommended for complex projects is this method, which is the first principles risk analysis, or FPRA. And obviously the simplest one is this one, the predefined factor base, which is based on the is as easy as putting a percentage on the base estimate. And that's quite simple, as you can imagine, and it's predefined. So in other words, you might say, look, in my organization, if the project is more than, I don't know, 5 million, we need to have 10% contingency. If a project is more than, sorry, less than 5 million, you put 10% contingency. Project more than 10, less than 50, we just add 20%, and so on and so on. And it might be the predefined factor might be based on the different, some sort of criteria. It might be based on the size, value, risk sector, and so on and so on. For the purpose of today, if you're interested in the methods, in any of them, it's actually the guideline does provide quite good details about each and every of those methodologies, as well as examples and case studies. But for the purpose of today, we want to have a look a little bit more into the FPRA. So when it comes to FPRA, or specifically on the cost risk analysis, one of the key elements of the modeling is the distributions and the ranges. And what it means is that when you're putting some estimate, doesn't matter if it's a productivity rate or it's the quantum, generally there is a range of variables. In other words, if you don't, let's say excavation, like you just want to dig a hole, the size of the foundation is not clear. And generally you try to use the size of it by using a distribution, like what's the possibility that in the best case scenario, what's the volume, what's the worst case scenario, and then you make assumption on the most likely scenario that can help you to better understand it. And obviously there are a wide range of different types of distribution that you can use, and we'll get into them a little bit more. So yeah, so that's about the distribution one. In terms of the process, this is how the FPRA works. The process has two avenues. One is starting from left, which is developing the base, both base estimate and base schedule. And the other one is starting from this side, which is workshops and risk and uncertainty. So how does it work? I mean, from a base estimate perspective, we're using some estimating software and we develop some base estimate. We also use the scheduling software, some software like Primavera, Oracle Primavera, or Microsoft Project, or Astra, or some of those scheduling tools that we develop the schedule. And at the same time, some of the schedule information will get into the cost estimate. So we do get the base estimate ready. And then from the right side, we start to have running some risk workshops, having the discussions with the stakeholders, pre-workshop sessions, post-workshop sessions. We define the inherent risk, contingent risk, schedule risk as well. And then altogether, it will get into the cost risk model. And then you put everything, including the correlations between the contingent risk and inherent risk, and all those interdependencies and relationships between them to develop a model. I will give you a few seconds to look at this process. Okay. So on that basis, how does it work in practice? In practice, if you if you look at this cost breakdown structure, work breakdown structure, you will see there are different levels, like from a project level, and that's the example, right? Separate portion, SPs, phases, location, disciplines, work packages, and first principle estimate. So when it comes to the first principles estimate, we prepare the estimate at this level. In other words, each work packages, we get into how much material do we need, what sort of labor do we need, what's the equipment, what sort of equipment do we need, and what's the subcontractor. And there might be some scenarios that we do have all of them, or one of them, or two of them, so it's quite different. But that's the way we do the first principles estimate. From a risk perspective, this is a section that will get the way it works. In other words, you started to put some ranges against that level, then you roll them up at the high level or aggregate them to the high level. It might be level 4 or 5. You define the correlations, and then you put the contingent risk as well, and then you do the simulation, and then add it up or aggregate them to the top level, and you make an assessment on the required contingency at the project level. What sort of distributions do we have? Quite frankly, it's a lot. There's just many of them. But the reality is, unless there are some specific, I mean, from a construction perspective, there are only a few of them that they're quite common, like uniform, like trigen, like triangle, normal, paired, alt paired, and obviously alt type of it as well. Beta is okay. So you see some of them, not all of them, but so you might ask, what's the purpose of the other distributions? Is a good question. What it is actually is that the simulation is not only for construction. There are some scenarios like I don't know, for example, flooding, insurance, There are many examples or case studies or scenarios that the simulation being used. And sometimes if you do have a data, you need to define, if you have the historical data, then you need to define the distribution, and you need to identify which distribution actually fits the, or which data fits the best distribution. I remember for one of our projects for rain data, we use normal. So when we assessed them, we realized that the normal distribution actually quite reasonable. We went to a different zone or different location, and we were assuming that the normal distribution is the right assumption, right distribution. When we test the data, historical data, we really realized that the log normal, which was this type, is actually fits better. So as you can see, there's actually, depending on the actual data, the type of the distribution might be different. Additional distribution in terms of the discrete, and this is the continuous distribution, this is the discrete distribution, and they're quite common. I mean, the one that they're quite common is the binomial or Bernoulli. These two, they're quite common in construction. If you're interested in terms of the modeling, the other document that I recommend you can refer to is the guide note 3A, which is the probabilistic contingency estimation from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications. And there's a number of good information there that can help you to identify which distribution is the better distribution or best distribution for different scenarios. One of the key elements or key aspects of modeling is the correlation. And the correlation, I'm not going to read that because when there's a reference there, there is a section in the guideline, RES guideline as well. You can refer to it. But correlation in the short term is a relationship, is a dependency or relationship in the risk analysis modeling. It might be between one variable and the other. It might be between two risks. It might be between a number of risks. It might be positive or negative. In other words, if this risk happens, the other risk won't happen. Or if this risk happens, the other one goes up as well. There's a higher likelihood and so on and so on. So there is quite, and correlation based on our experience or my experience, definitely the correlation is quite fundamental. If you want to make sure that your model is reasonable, the correlation is one of those important factors. And the impact, a number of case studies or a number of examples have been done. The one that I'm presenting here, again, is coming from the guide note 3.8, and it does have some showing what's the impact of correlation is on the modeling. Last but not the least is the cognitive biases, and it's quite interesting because this is the softer skills. A couple of them, like optimism, the people generally, they're positive or they think they can do it better than everyone else. Availability, confidence, anchoring, which is quite interesting one. Like you're running the risk workshop, the first person says $10 million. Everyone else, we just, you set around 10 million. So you might say, oh no, it might be 12 million, it might be 8 million, but no one comes and they say, oh no, it's 50 million. And that's anchoring, because the first number that you put in, the first view that you put in, generally the other people, it might have impact on everyone else's views, and that's, we call it anchoring. And why it's important? Because a lot of information that we put into the modeling, they are subjective. In other words, we don't have actual data. Excuse me. And from that perspective, it's important to be able to identify the cognitive biases and manage them, to ensure that the data, we clean them as much as we can. You get the model, and eventually the result, it's some sort of different types. It might be through histogram, it might be through the S-curve with the total cost. some of the tornadoes that will give you the top risk. And it's a wide range of tools available that you can use, and they're quite common in the industry. Few takeaways. Phase of the project is definitely important in terms of which method of cost contingency determination is the best one. Make sure that depending on the phase, it actually heavily depends on which phase. Make sure that the most likely assumptions are being used for base estimate and base schedule. Different approaches we do have, top down and bottom up. You need to make a call, which one is the best for your project. You need to make sure that the inherent and contingent being assessed at the same time should have a wide range of uncertainty there. Do you remember the distribution? You need to make sure that is wide completely. The probability density function or distribution, you need to make sure that it's properly done. Optimism bias or cognitive biases that we just discussed is so important. Correlation is another important factor there. And schedule contingency and its integration into the QRA or CRA model. Don't forget about the schedule. As you can see, it's quite an interesting topic. And but if you're interested, definitely I recommend that you refer to the REST guideline and other references that we do have, or send me an email, or and we can have a conversation. I hope you found this presentation useful as well. So till the next one, thank you. Bye.